What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with Flash issue number 30, the final story in the Flash comic before we get into the conclusion of DC KO. And DC Comics is bringing Crisis on Infinite Earths into DC KO. Now, in case you have not been following our coverage of The Flash, number one, you'll find a link to the playlist. I'll make sure Alex posts it down there. And number two, the long and short of what's been happening so far is that at the very beginning of this DC KO event and the Flash involvement, Barry Allen's grandson, right, Bart Allen, tried to go back to the moment before Darkseid was killed when he created the Absolute Universe, kind of allowing himself to die, so to speak, and tried to stop Darkseid. As you can imagine, it didn't go very well. And because Wally West had followed Impulse back to try to stop him from messing with the time stream, the two of them were time displaced, actually going as far back as the early 1900s. And from there, it was just a cat and mouse game through time. They were being chased by the Legion of Darkseid. They were trying to escape the Legion of Darkseid. Along that time, they ended up snatching up Max Mercury, turning him to their side, so now they have another ally, albeit Max as he existed at the start of the 1900s as opposed to the present day Max Mercury. And that brings us here to Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Impulse came here in order to try to save Barry. And so at this point, it's more of a story about Impulse trying to fix problems in the time stream as opposed to it actually being part of the main DC KO event. And you'll see what I mean, but we're told they called it the Great Crisis, an ending so everything could begin. You know the song, and heck, I bet you could sing the refrain by now. But these endings, every one of them, they hurt, they kill, and we carry them with us the rest of our lives, sometimes even into our deaths. And that's when we switch over to Barry. And he says, "My name is Barry Allen. I am the Flash, and if I do not stop the Anti-Monitor from firing this antimatter cannon, every remaining universe will be destroyed. Countless lives." And he says, the power core, this is it. And that's when Impulse shows up and tries to stop Barry. Now, a little bit of filling in the gaps here. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this bit of Barry's history, most of you guys are probably aware that Barry died during Crisis on Infinite Earths. He was supposed to die, right? It was supposed to be the end of his character's story. And post-Crisis, the Flash mythos would continually focus on Wally West, which it did, right, for a few decades, right? You go into Mike Barron's run, William Messner-Loeb's, then you go into Mark Waid's critically acclaimed run, Grant Morrison, Jeff Johns. But what matters is that during Final Crisis, Grant Morrison brought Barry Allen back. And what we found out was that when he had quote-unquote died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, what had actually happened is he had been stuck in the Speed Force. And while he was there, he was literally outrunning death the entire time. And so that's what it means when you see that scene when Barry comes running out of the Speed Force and just shouts, "Run," right? And the black racer's right behind him because he's literally being chased by death. This is that moment right before he was supposed to die. And that's why Bart tells him, right, "You can't do this. I will not let you." And Barry doesn't know who Bart Allen is, right? He has no clue who Bart is. And he just says, "Son, I don't know who you are, but I have to do this." And Impulse says, "I am a hero. Heroes fix things." And so he literally tackles Barry in an effort to save his life. And at that point, we switch over to Darkseid, because keep in mind, Darkseid exists in the Absolute Universe, and he's watching all of this unfold. And he's told by his Dark Legion, "Master, if Impulse interrupts this moment, your whole grand plan could come to an end." But Darkseid cuts them off, and he says, "Patience, the Allen boy seeks to save his grandfather." And so that's where Saturn Girl just says, by letting the Anti-Monitor fire that cannon, it will destroy every remaining world. And the response of Darkseid, "No, child, Impulse will save his grandfather by taking his place, sacrificing himself." And because Impulse is a living embodiment of the Speed Force, when he dies, the Speed Force will die, and Omega Speed will reign supreme throughout my new universe. And he says it will be the nervous system of all that ever was, is, and shall be, in my name. Because keep in mind, Darkseid, as powerful as he is, cannot destroy the Speed Force. It's simply just too much. Right? It's way too powerful for him to wipe out on his own. But if the person who is the living embodiment of the Speed Force chose to end themselves, then it would destroy the Speed Force as well. And so again, that's what he's hoping for. And so at that point, you switch over, back to Bart and to Barry. And Barry just kind of knocks him out of the way and says, "Look, I'm sorry, son, but we have a limited time here." And so at that point, Darkseid kind of starts to nudge Impulse and says, "Save him. You don't have to let him go. Be the hero you profess to be. And so that's why Bart responds here through this subtle manipulation, and he says, let me do it. Let me take your place. I am faster, right? Maybe I can pull this off without ending myself. And that's where Barry just says, I told you, for your own good, get out of here now. And Bart just says, no, right? I will not let you go. It does not have to be this way. And that's what's kind of crazy, because you jump back to the Legion, right? And there's a statement, incredible. You've thought of every contingency, right? Amend what can serve you even better. All hail Darkseid. And in that moment, Wally West shows up, because Wally realizes this is the place he needs to be, to target Darkseid and the Legion directly. And that's where Darkseid just points to Wally and says, kill West, destroy him now, right? And that's where he just says, my name is Wally West, and I'm probably about to get the crap kicked out of me, but I need to stop Darkseid from stopping Impulse from stopping Barry before Barry stops the antimatter cannon. And when he gets hit, he's just like, so much stopping. Now, of course, he incapacitates Saturn Girl pretty quickly, right? Takes her out pretty fast. And then at that point, you jump to Max Mercury, and he says, my name is Whip Whirlwind, or Max Mercury. The point is, I am not the Flash. I've come through the time stream, even as it barely holds itself together, to recruit help. Wally told me about the tournament that this Justice League is currently embroiled in. Darkseid could corrupt every hero in existence or destroy them outright. Even I was corrupted, because he was overtaken by Saturn Girl and manipulated by Darkseid. But he says, Wally said that there's one person who is immune to Omega energy, and I have to find them. But this is Challenger's Mountain, so I simply may just be too late. And when he gets to his destination, he's asked, too late for what, Mr. Lickety-Split? And that's where Max says, you must be Rocky Davis from the Challengers of the Unknown. Now, let's explain this, and let's give you guys some context. Number one, the Challengers of the Unknown are dope, and the Christopher Cantwell story is fantastic. And while we won't go through every single detail, we will talk about what pertains here. So the giant robot that you see here is Ultivac. Ultivac's cool, right? He's kind of like a sentient robot, essentially, right? He was created by a woman named June, and there's a whole history there. The first time they met, he tried to create an army of robots and so on and so forth, destroy the Challengers of the Unknown, that kind of thing. What matters is this, within the context of the story and how they got here, in the Challengers of the Unknown series by Christopher Cantwell, that comes in the aftermath of Darkseid basically dying and creating the absolute universe. What had happened is that these kind of like Omega energy anomalies started popping up, right, all throughout creation. And so the Challengers of the Unknown were basically tasked and asked by Mr. Terrific to investigate them. And the Challengers ended up being paired with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Shazam, the idea being that these guys, the Justice League members, could provide some measure of assistance to any kind of issue that the Challengers run into if they don't have the powers they need in order to defeat these guys. Now, in the bigger picture, the Challengers of the Unknown are effectively the precursor to the Fantastic Four. They were introduced in 1957 in DC Showcase number 6. As most of you guys are aware, a few years later, the Fantastic Four popped up. Now, this is one of those times when people will say that the Challengers of the Unknown was a concept stolen by Stan Lee for the Fantastic Four. I would actually argue there's an argument to be made that it was Jack Kirby who did it, because Jack Kirby created the team, right, for DC Comics back in the old DC Showcase days. But honestly, that's neither here nor there. What matters is this: when the Omega energy anomalies were discovered, each member of the Challengers outside of Rocky, because they had experienced so much death over the course of their lives, they were corrupted by Omega energy, because Omega energy is the energy of death. They were the perfect hosts, right? It's like having a compromised immune system and then contracting some kind of a cold or a flu or an illness. Your body's kind of primed for it because it can't fight off that kind of an infection. And so because Rocky basically stayed on the space station, the Justice League Watchtower, he wasn't infected by any of the anomalies. But what ends up happening is that in issue number 4 and number 5, he's basically tossed into the past alongside Ultivac, which is how he ends up here. We can cover Challengers of the Unknown if you're interested. It's a really cool story. It ties directly into everything that's happening now, so it's pretty solid, right? It's certainly worth a read if you don't care about whether we cover it or not. But what matters is this, right? In seeing that Rocky is here, Max Mercury is just like, you're alive. You're here, right? And that's where Rocky just says, yeah, sure, but like, I'm not worth much. Ultivac and I, we floated into that Omega Rift. In the face of Darkseid's power, we chose life. We somehow ended up in the past. And so that's where Max just says, right? My friend named Wally believes the more we disrupt and change what occurred, the more it becomes a mess, referring to the time stream. But he says, my friend Bart believes that if we possess that power, we should try to undo every wrong that's ever happened. So we're talking about moral quandaries here, right? Ethics. And so Max just says, both of these are intriguing hypotheses, and I don't know which one is right. And Rocky just says, me neither, man, right? But those innocent people down there are all dead, hundreds of them, and I just watched my home get destroyed again, which had actually happened in Challengers of the Unknown, issue number 1 from 1991, I believe was the year it came out. But Max just says, Rocky Davis, you can still help, right? There is a greater threat. And Rocky's like, isn't there always? And so at this point, we switch back over to Wally, right? And Wally just says, the surface of apocalypse, right? It's scenic. Excess is in hot pursuit, but I am faster, especially as we get closer and closer to my present. But if life has taught me one thing, it's that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so that's where Excess just says, for Omega, for Darkseid, and then is suddenly whisked away to the Omega Force and doesn't know where she is. And Darkseid just says, I absorbed you into the Omega Force, my Legionnaire, for you have failed me. You could not run fast enough. Now, you will burn here forever, and just leaves. And so at that point, Wally goes to attack Darkseid and just says, all of this ends now. And Darkseid just says, you must be proud of Bart Allen. So selfless, because at that point, Wally doesn't realize what's going on with Bart. He doesn't realize everything that's happening in that moment. Now, of course, the Legionnaires show up and they try to fight Wally for touching Darkseid because, they love and adore him so much. But Darkseid just says, I will place you on my pyre of dead soon enough. But first, watch Impulse play hero. And that's where he looks at the screen monitors and sees that Bart is fighting Barry and trying to sacrifice himself instead of letting Barry do it. And so that's what he says, right? Barry and Bart, they are fighting inside the anti-monitor's core. And so he just says, I've still got my Legion flight ring. This could very well be suicide, but Bart wouldn't think twice. Let's see if my aura can last at least a few light years before I freeze or suffocate to death. And he just says, I am coming, Bart, and takes off, right? It's super speed. But where the Legionnaires are sent by Darkseid to respond, that's when Rocky, Max, and Ultivac show up to basically kind of offer some measure of defense, right? To hold the line, giving Barry the time he needs to escape. Now, here's the funny thing about it, is that in the midst of all of this, Saturn Girl goes to make her move, right? And tries to retake control of Max Mercury, because having a speedster on their side would basically nullify this fight with Rocky and Ultivac. They would never really have much of a chance. But that's where Ultivac just starts hammering on Saturn Girl and says her mind powers are strong, but I have no mind. And of course, Rocky's like, look, man, don't sell yourself short. Right? You have a mind, you're sentient, you can think for yourself. But again, in that moment, because it was all a distraction, Darkseid's taken off, right? Disappeared. And Max is like, where in the world did he go? And so that's where Rocky just says, to your friends on that ship, get a boom tube working. He's going there. We have to follow him, because if he shows up on the scene, it's endgame. Right? And so at that point, you pick up with Wally showing up to confront both Barry and Bart. And he actually tries to tell them, right, stop, I have tried this exact thing. It will not work. And Wally has, right? Wally's tried to go back and prevent Barry from sacrificing himself, even at the expense of everything that Crisis on Infinite Earths does. Because keep in mind, Crisis on Infinite Earths is one of these significant events in the history of the DC universe and multiverse. It was the first crisis. It eliminated the multiverse as it previously existed, and then set in motion a singular timeline that we called New Earth. And while a lot of that's kind of been undone and changed and altered based on the Dark Crisis event from more recent years, or instead of it kind of wiping out all that history, that instead it restores it all, that the idea behind this is that at the end of the day, this event has to happen. Barry has to die, or at least sacrifice himself during Crisis on Infinite Earths. Everything that comes after hinges on that. It's the significance of these iconic moments within the time stream. And so that's where Impulse just says, sorry, Granddad, and clocks Barry. And then he just says, Wally, I am not going to stand by and let bad stuff happen. I am the Speed Force, and I can do this. We can do this. And so the problem is that when Wally goes to stand in and try to stop Bart, the Darkseid shows up and snatches up Wally and yanks him away and just says, he's right. You let Barry Allen die. Don't you remember? You are no hero. Wally West, just a coward, unwanted, an imposter, and a fraud. And so in the midst of all of this, Jay Garrick chimes in momentarily. Now keep in mind, Jay Garrick lost during DCKO, so he's essentially dead, or at least existing in the form of a statue, but he's still able to reach out to Bart and speak to him, even if he can't be there physically. And that's what he says: Bart, you are the Speed Force. You are what binds us together. And where Bart says, like, but Jay cuts him off and says, be what you are meant to be. And he just says, my name is Jay Garrick. I was defeated in Darkseid's sick tournament, but when Bart Allen became the Speed Force blast, I still felt it that day. I felt the heart of Apocalypse bleed. And so that's where Barry just says, not much time, right? And it says, and then Barry began what he had to do, which was sacrificing himself. And so Jay Garrick appearing as a kind of form of energy just long enough to hit Darkseid and allow Wally West to break free. Wally in turn goes and grabs Impulse and says, no, right? That cannot happen. And even Impulse doesn't understand, right? He's like, why does this have to happen? Why does Barry have to die? And the response of Wally is, because it's his choice, Bart. It's what makes him a hero. And we will all see him again. He's going to come back. But he says, he will return to us. We fight, we endure, we die, we live, we depart, we return, our sacred cycle forever, for all time. And he says, I see it happen. It hurts. Every part of me grieves, screams, wails, but I know it's not the end. Now, this is important, and it's very easy to gloss over. I've seen a lot of reviews on Reddit and on Twitter and across social media where people kind of lambast it as a comic that's mid at best. And while there's certainly aspects of it that, kind of either don't make sense or really aren't all that great, the important thing here is that when it comes to this moment, this is Mark Waid etching in stone the fact that there are certain elements of the Flash mythos that will always be iconic and will always stay intact. Barry Allen sacrificing himself during Crisis on Infinite Earths is arguably the most iconic moment of his character in the history of DC Comics. It's what most DC fans know him for. If they know him for nothing else, they know him as the guy who died during the Great Crisis. But not only that, when it comes to the timeline, there are some things you cannot change. They are etched in stone for eternity. There's no way to go back and undo it. There's no way to prevent it from happening. If you do, the consequences are disastrous. The Great Crisis is one of them. Flashpoint is another. When Barry tried to go back and save his mom's life, successfully did so and screwed up the timeline. His mom has to die. It has to work that way. So again, these are incredibly important moments, and it's cool to see that Mark Waid is kind of solidifying this, etching it in stone as a moment that will forever exist within the timeline. And so in this moment, as Barry just kind of fades away, just like he did in the original Crisis event, it does succeed in defeating the Anti-Monitor. But Wally just says, don't look, Bart. And Bart says, Wally, in the Speed Force, I can see him. I can see Barry. And Barry's just kind of roaming around in here, right? And he says, wait, where am I? Right? What is this place? And Bart appears to him in a non-corporeal form and says, the Speed Force, Barry Allen, you did it. You saved us all. I am so proud of you, Grandpa. I am proud to be an Allen. Now, this is the true nature of the retcon that Mark Waid has been introducing here as part of the Flash mythos. And some people might argue it's, 32 years in the making? Mark Waid was the one who introduced the Speed Force in DC Comics. And so Mark Waid is now the one who's coming back within this story, specifically in issue number 29, running up to this, essentially introducing the idea that the Speed Force itself is part and parcel to the Flashes, and all the members of the Flash family just represent different aspects of the Speed Force. Nothing more, nothing less. That flies in the face of it all. Those of you guys who are familiar with the Speed Force know that yes, Wally West mainlines the Speed Force, Barry Allen created it, but in some fashion or another, everybody just tapped into it in some capacity. And while that's still true to this day, keep in mind that DC Next Level is coming up. And so we may very well see huge changes building from this as far as how the Flashes relate to the Speed Force. But that's the retcon, right? That they all are just somehow a representation representation of the Speed Force in different forms and fashions. And so that's when you switch back to this moment here, when the antimatter cannon of the Anti-Monitor is about to explode, right? The core is exploding. We have to get out of here as fast as we can. And Wally even says the time stream, it's all but destroyed. We will not make it here, right? But again, Ultivax just says, I can trace Omega points in time, because ultimately they're stuck here, right? They don't have the ability to jump through the stream anymore like they previously could. And so that's where Wally just says, take us to the strongest source of Omega energy you can detect, which has to be the DCKO tournament. They're literally fighting for the heart of Apocalypse, all that Omega energy. Now, the other thing here is that Jay Garrick just says, look, I have to go back to my time, right? I can't disrupt the time stream by traveling with you. But if all goes well, I will see you in the future anyway, and likely remember all of this. And so that's when Wally says, the League needs us. The battle ahead is far from over. But if I ever time travel again, I will eat my own shoe. And he says, time resets. Things change and stay the same. We depart and we return. This is our sacred cycle. Forever, for all time. And so that's when Wally just looks at Impulse and says, this is it, Bart, the whole shebang. And Bart's like, then what are we waiting for, Wally? And Wally just says, I will race you there, because at this point, they are taking off to DCKO and the ending of the story with issue number 5. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. In effect, this is just a closed time loop, is really all it is. But it's awesome nonetheless. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.